It was a serene, sunny morning in what was meant to be a tranquil neighborhood. The type of place where neighbors exchanged polite nods, children cycled around, and the biggest issue was whether the mailman was punctual. At least, that was before Karen anointed herself as the ruler of the cul-de-sac. Karen wasn't just any neighbor. She was the neighbor, the self-proclaimed custodian of all things trivial. With a clipboard in hand, she roamed the sidewalks, vigilantly searching for any violations: a misplaced garden gnome, a car parked over her imaginary boundary line, all of which were unacceptable in her eyes. "You have no authority over my property." The sheer horror on her face was priceless. Her eyes blinked rapidly, processing my words as though in a foreign language. "That doesn't matter," she insisted. "You live here. The rules apply to everyone." I was about to argue, but then I realized something. This wasn't about HOA regulations. It wasn't even about me, really. It was about Karen's desperate need to feel in control, to wield whatever little authority she considered she had. And unfortunately, I had become her latest project. I could have ignored her behavior entirely, lived my life, pretending Karen and her clipboard didn't exist. But the problem with people like her is they thrive on non-resistance. Give them an inch, and suddenly they're measuring your grass with a ruler and filing complaints about the shade of your mailbox. So I decided to have a bit of fun. The next morning, I repainted my front door. Not neon green, as Karen might have feared, but the exact shade of beige it had previously been. Then, I printed a document with an official-looking letterhead and placed it in my window. This property is not governed by the HOA. Any complaints should be directed to the wind. It took exactly 2 hours for Karen to appear. She stood on the sidewalk, squinting at my door, then at the sign, then back at my door. She pulled out her phone, snapped a picture, and furiously typed, likely an email to an imaginary HOA board, convening emergency meetings solely to discuss my property. Later that evening, I received a text from my neighbor, Tom. "Dude, Karen is fuming. She says you're mocking the integrity of the neighborhood." Integrity over a paint color that hadn't even changed? I laughed and texted back, "Did she measure my grass yet?" Oh, she did. I peeked outside, and there she was, standing in my yard, ruler in hand, dramatically assessing my lawn as if solving a crime scene. I stepped outside. "Karen, do you need help?" She jumped, caught red-handed in her absurd inspection. "Your grass is longer than regulation height," she snapped. I stared at her. Again, not in the HOA. She pursed her lips. "That doesn't mean you can just ignore community standards." I couldn't help but grin. "Oh, I don't ignore them. I just interpret them creatively." She stormed off, muttering about further action. I didn't know what that meant, but it was clear Karen wasn't finished with me yet. Word spread quickly. By the next day, the entire street was buzzing about the great HOA showdown between me and Karen. Some found it amusing, while others cautiously observed from the sidelines, waiting to see who'd emerge victorious. Tom, my next-door neighbor, was the first to officially support me. "Dude, she's losing it," he confided as we stood by our mailboxes. "She came to my house last night and told me my porch light was too bright for neighborhood harmony." What does that even mean? Did you ask her for the official lumens limit in the non-existent neighborhood rule book? I joked. Oh, I did, he laughed. She had a list, and she was checking it twice. Although this wasn't Christmas, and Karen was far from Santa. I had been a resident in my home for several years, mindfully keeping to myself, taking care of my lawn, and steering clear of unnecessary drama. But Karen had different intentions. She told me not to get smart with her. Apparently, I wasn't the only target of Karen's harassment. The elderly couple down the street received a stern letter about their garden flamingos. A single mom got scolded for her kids leaving bikes in the driveway, and Tom got fined, yes, fined, for having his trash cans visible for longer than 15 minutes after pickup. The best part? The fine was handwritten by Karen. However, not everyone was against her. A small group of similarly self-important neighbors started backing her up. The ones who vigorously nodded at HOA meetings, whispering about maintaining standards while clutching their organic lattes. She has a binder, man, Tom said, shaking his head. A binder full of complaints. I nearly choked on my coffee. A binder? She calls it the neighborhood offenders list.
This was becoming ridiculous. It wasn't just about my grass anymore. It was a full-blown suburban Cold War.
While I was content with passive resistance, I realized Karen wasn't going to stop until she either broke me or got her way. Which meant it was time to escalate. Karen wasn't slowing down. If anything, my refusal to adhere to her make-believe rules only made her more determined. The complaint letters escalated. Her clipboard became a permanent fixture in her hand. And then, one fateful afternoon, she did the unthinkable. She called 911. I was in my backyard enjoying a beer when I heard sirens. Not one, but 2 police cars pulled up in front of my house. For a split second, I thought something serious had occurred, maybe a break-in or an accident, something actually warranting this response. But nope. Karen was in my driveway, arms crossed, lips pursed in satisfaction as the officers emerged. One of them looked exhausted, like he had already decided this was a waste of time. I set my beer down and approached. "Is there a problem, officers?" One of them sighed. "She claims you're trespassing." I blinked, perplexed. "On my own property?" Karen stepped forward. "This land is governed by the HOA. He is in violation and refuses to comply. If he won't follow the rules, he shouldn't be allowed to live here." The officer rubbed his temples. "Ma'am, we don't handle HOA disputes." "It's not a dispute. It's the law," she screeched, waving her ever-present clipboard like the Constitution. "Officer," I interjected, "I own this property. I'm not in the HOA." The second officer glanced at Karen. "Ma'am, is he legally bound to HOA rules?" "Well, technically no, but..." The first officer immediately turned to me. "You're free to go." "Awesome," I grinned. "Since I'm already home, I think I'll stay." Karen's face turned a shade of red I'd only seen on malfunctioning electronics. "But he's ruining the neighborhood." The officer gave her a long, tired look. "Ma'am, unless he's committing a crime, you can't keep calling the police over personal grievances. That's when it happened. The ultimate moment of defeat." The officer handed her a warning for misuse of emergency services. Tom, who had come outside to witness the spectacle, let out an audible ooh, like we were at a rap battle. Karen stood frozen, her mind clearly short-circuiting at the realization of her loss. She strutted up my driveway, her posture exuding self-importance, and pointed at my mailbox as if it had somehow insulted her. "That's not regulation height," she declared, her voice laced with the smugness of someone who had appointed herself president of the HOA. I blinked at her, confused. "I'm not in the HOA," I replied. And just like that, the tide turned. The moment Karen received that warning, the neighborhood shifted. It was as if everyone had been holding their breath, waiting for her to finally overstep. And she had. The police leaving without a second glance at me was the first domino to fall. The next was the HOA meeting. Now, normally, I wouldn't have bothered attending an HOA meeting, since, I wasn't in the HOA. But after Karen's spectacular 9/11 debacle, my neighbor Tom convinced me that this particular meeting was worth witnessing. "She's losing it, man," he whispered as we entered the community center. "She's trying to get them to extend HOA authority to non-member homes for the greater good." I almost choked on my water. "That's not even legally possible." "Oh, she knows that," he replied. "But she thinks if she throws a big enough tantrum, they'll just let her do it." And oh boy, did she try. Karen stood at the front, binder in hand, flipping through pages as she ranted about community integrity, unified standards, and problematic residents. When she gestured vaguely in my direction, I gave her a cheerful wave. The HOA board members, bless their tired souls, were done. One of them, an older man who looked like he'd survived multiple Karens, sighed deeply and adjusted his glasses. "Karen," he said, in the tone of a father who's been called to the principal's office too many times, "we cannot govern properties that are not part of the HOA. But they should be," she argued. "If we let him get away with whatever he wants, then everyone will think they can just ignore the rules." Someone in the back muttered, "Because they can," and a few chuckles followed. The HOA president sighed again, rubbing his temples. "Karen, this is not up for debate, and frankly, we've had multiple complaints about you overstepping your authority." Her face went pale. "Excuse me?" A woman on the board, barely suppressing her amusement, pulled out a stack of papers. "We've received reports of you issuing fake violation notices, attempting to fine residents without proper authorization, and," she paused, raising an eyebrow, "calling the police over grass height." Karen sputtered. "That was an emergency." The HOA president ignored her. "Effective immediately, you are removed from any neighborhood committees. You are no longer authorized to distribute notices, warnings, or fines. If you continue, you will be facing penalties." The room fell silent. Karen opened her mouth, closed it, then grabbed her precious binder and stormed out, knocking over a plastic chair in the process. The door slammed behind her, and for the first time in a long time, the neighborhood felt at peace. To celebrate, that weekend, half the street put up inflatable lawn decorations, gaudy, over the top, and flagrantly violating Christmas standards, even in the middle of July. Life returned to normal, or at least a version of normal, minus Karen lurking with a clipboard, hunting for crimes against suburban perfection. Trash cans lingered outside a little longer, garden gnomes multiplied like a cheerful little army, and Tom's cat reclaimed its spot on every lawn in the cul-de-sac. As for Karen, she laid low for a while. At first, she still stomped around, arms crossed, muttering whenever she saw a violation she could do nothing about. But without her fake authority, and without anyone taking her seriously, she was just a grumpy lady with too much time on her hands. Then, one day, she was gone. The official word was that she and her husband moved to a more structured community, which we all interpreted as an HOA where she could rule unchallenged. No one threw a going-away party. But Tom and I shared a celebratory drink when the moving truck finally disappeared down the street. The best part? The actual HOA never bothered me again. Not a single passive-aggressive letter, nor any ridiculous demands. Her face froze, resembling someone whose belief system had just been toppled, akin to informing a die-hard flat-earther that globes exist. I briefly hoped that logic would prevail and she would move on to someone else's mailbox. However, I was mistaken. It turns out, the real board members weren't interested in picking fights with homeowners not under their jurisdiction. They just wanted Karen to stop giving them headaches. So the neighborhood was peaceful once more, and to ensure it stayed that way, I added a small touch to my front yard, a mailbox decal that read, "Not in the HOA," just in case another Karen ever tried to challenge me. This wasn't about rules. It was about control. And Karen wasn't about to let a non-member ruin her meticulously curated neighborhood dictatorship. This was only the beginning. The following day, I found a note taped to my front door. At first glance, it looked official, boldly typed with phrases like "notice of violation" and "failure to comply." However, a closer examination revealed the sender, Karen, Neighborhood Standards Representative. This wasn't an actual title, not in any legal sense. I sighed, removing the paper from the door, and read her list of grievances. My trash bins had lingered outside 30 minutes too long after pickup. My grass was half an inch taller than it should be. And, her personal favorite, the color of my front door was, in her words, unapproved and disruptive to the neighborhood aesthetic. It was beige, the same beige that adorned half the houses on the street. I crumpled the notice and tossed it in the trash, assuming that would be the end of it. But Karen wasn't someone who let things go. That evening, Karen reappeared, clipboard in hand, tapping her pen like a drill sergeant preparing for battle. "I noticed you ignored the notice I left," she said. I folded my arms. I didn't ignore it. I read it. Then I threw it away. Her lips compressed into a thin line. "This isn't optional. If you don't fix these violations, there will be consequences." "Like what?" I asked, genuinely curious how far she thought she could go. She huffed, expecting me to relent. "Fines. Possible legal action." I laughed. "Karen, I'm not in the HOA.